Welcome to the Praxis Behind the Obscure podcast. And today I have a returning guest by the name of Frater R.C. And we are actually both working on the Heptarchia Mystica. So I think that would be one interesting thing, one interesting intersection point we can both talk about. I actually just recently wrote a blog about the Heptarchia Mystica. And I had a very powerful experience. In fact, the most powerful evocation experience I've ever had was working with the Heptarchia Mystica very recently. And so I did basically the Scott Stenwick method, which we actually both interviewed Scott Stenwick. We both read his both. I basically...
It is a Nokian course that Jason Newcomb.
Exactly.
Yeah,
we both take his course, right? And so we both worked on the same thing. I had a very, very powerful experience. So it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about what's your experience been like working with the Heptarchia Mystica. And are there any modifications you've done? What kind of experiences have you had working with perhaps the kings or the princes or the ministers, the governors? What kind of experiences have you had so far?
Well, you know, what's been really interesting is to look at it following the de-purist approach.
Okay.
Because obviously in the way we've been looking at it, we've not just followed Stenwick, who is incredibly useful, and you couldn't want a better magical introduction to a complex subject in a single book, let alone for the $10 I think it costs on Amazon. Yeah. And then he has all this other sort of investigations into different uses of opening rituals, like the hexagram and pentagram, LIRH, LBRP, and
exactly,
and that stuff. And then he's got all this some thelemic variations of things, but he still includes the Christian original form of the Latin prayer or whatever, which I thought is very liberal minded of him, because as you know, I'm certainly not thelemic at all.
Sure.
And so it's really it speaks highly of an author and a book when they can sort of transcend their perspective on the subject and look at it not just as a religious thelemite, but as a magician, and then go a step further and say there might even be, you might want to just take it the Christian way, or he did investigations of the GD system version of Enochian and found that was incredibly effective. So yeah, but also looking at Aaron Leach's and all the other main literature led to a very different perspective of approaching the angels of the Tabula Bonorum, which I had only done in a Golden Dawn format before, right? Mm-hmm. And that was very, very different. And so looking at the purist approach to Heptarchia has been fascinating. Unlike what E.A. Quetting says in his Black Magic Enochian stuff, it's like, based on what I can see, it looks like the whole thing's running on Jesus juice. This is happening under the authority of Jesus Christ.
Right.
So regardless of what the Goetic spirits told John R. King about Jesus just being a man and insignificant, apparently no one CC'd the Enochian angels on that. So they're all about that Christ power, baby.
Right. Well, I think that's an interesting point of conversation that we can both have, is that I've worked quite extensively with the Enochian entities themselves, as well as you, right? Yeah. You've worked with the Golden Dawn style. You've worked with perhaps the Stenwick's model, the original model. I mean, I think that alone is a long conversation. Like, what are these entities? Are they the Christian apocalypse angels? Are they aliens? Are they, I don't know. Like, what do you even see these entities as? Because I think that's a pretty interesting point of conversation.
I think they're like fairy spirits.
Yeah. I mean, they could be, right?
Similar in nature. The density of their angelic form, shall we say, it's very aware, often, especially with the larger beings, more letters in their names, and with the Heptarchic angels, they outright are sort of rooting for you, it seems,
right,
and wanting to help you. Like our first operation, like like the results have been speaking for themselves, let's say.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, for me, like the last operation I did was with the it was on a Thursday with the Jupiter talisman. I used the Jupiter inseam of creation and the King and the Prince of Jupiter, right? And it was the most powerful evocation experience I've ever had. Literally, my room, I started seeing shape shifts in my room. It was like I was on LSD or DMT or something. Literally, around the holy table, I saw, literally, this is not a joke. I'm not playing jokes or trying to, what would you say, exaggerate or anything like that. I'm literally looking at the holy table. I see shape shifts. I see literally mosaic shapes. You know, like when you see mosaic, where it's like sort of blurry, but you see something behind it, right? I see mosaic shapes with things moving around it. And I literally feel presence moving around the table. And I see sort of hologram shapes around it. I commune with these entities. I talk with them. And then literally, this is not a joke, 2 days later, I charge the entities with what I'm interested. We commune together, we talk. 2 days later, I make $800 randomly, which is weird, right? That's very weird because of Jupiter entities. I charge with a little bit of a, you know, sort of a, with a sort of financial or economic incentive. But I say, hey, if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. However, literally 2 days later, I get contact. Okay, $800 for a 1-day job, which doesn't really ever happen, like once a year maybe. Which is very. Sort of, I mean that's literally instant results, right? You can view that as instantaneous almost in a way. But it wasn't even really the financial results that was interesting to me. It was literally the visual, the felt presence and the visual results were more interesting than any of the financial things that came after that.
It's interesting you say that, because that's actually one of the main reasons why I think it's unfortunate that money magic works, and that doing this work can even, you know, improving your life, you know, thaumaturgically or theurgically, can result in more abundance in every way, and that often includes economic ways. But it's unfortunate that works, and that money magic works so instantly, because I think it distracts a lot of people from all the other stuff, which to me is way more interesting. The reason I got into it, and is what's most unexplored. Like, why am I seeing these shapes? Why does when you do that first or second or both Enochian calls at the end of a conjuration, why does everything suddenly change?
Right, exactly. That's a good point. So as I mentioned before I tell the story, the more interesting thing to me is I did the first Enochian call, I did the second Enochian call, I had the table set up, I had the Jupiter inseam of creation. The more powerful experience was not even the $800. Cool, that's great. I'll take $800. I'm not going to lie, right? However, at the same time, it was more of the full experience was so powerful. Literally, my consciousness was raised multiple vibrations up, and I'm seeing literally shape shifting. I'm seeing all these visual things. I'm experiencing this powerful evocation on any level I've never experienced before, right? Literally visible evocation, where you see entities moving around, you see rainbow shapes popping out of them. That's a lot more powerful than money in your pocket, because that's a totally different level. It's like way beyond what the physical realm of money or, you know, objects or anything like that, right? And so for me, yeah, like you said, like, sure, the money magic, that's cool. It works, it can work, right? However, it's more of the total experience of raising your consciousness to a different level and having those experiences. And so, yeah, I'm curious about, like, you've been doing a lot of experience recently. How has that gone? You've done a lot of evocations with the Heptarchia Mystica.
We've been slowly. I've been teaching it, right? So I've been teaching it, and coming from the Golden Dawn tradition, as I do, we tend to break things down a lot. It's a very structuralist sort of approach, right? You do just this part of this one thing, this grade, just this part of this other thing, this grade, and then all of them in this grade, you know, for certain things. And there's different approaches to it, but overall, the idea is to break it down. And like, why is it that these orders all have versions or copies of reproduced grade material or rewritten grade material? It's all broken down step by step. Sure. But you don't see any published occult literature broken down so much step by step, especially in the Enochian or ceremonial field. It's a light blind to make you maybe just do a bit more work. But that is how people do learn things. So
Sure.
I've had to go through the purest material and learn about some of the updates and advancements that have occurred in the field since I learn the Bonorum that was the first Enochian magic I was taught in the inner order,
Oh,
because
interesting.
we were using it for a special project,
Okay.
for a year-long project, and that led to talismans, international group ceremony, like everyone flying the same place, doing a thing, and then sending adepts around the world to like plant talismans, like hardcore shit. That's what we spent most of our time doing. Really, is trying to help the world out, Rosicrucian style, really. And so I learned the Bonorum then, but that was 2000, 2001, 2002, and so breaking it down, there's quite an easy pathway into it, that's delightfully wonderful. And I also am a big believer in not needing all the tools to do everything, because as you know, like someone like you starts out in your Enochian path, first thing you're going to do is get a magic ring.
Okay, sure. I agree with
Maybe.
you. I agree with you. You don't need all the tools. However, okay, this is another interesting point. I totally agree with everything you said. However, would you say that having the stuff helps or doesn't help? What would you say?
Well, the reason the way I teach is to take people through the stages of it.
Sure.
Like, we start off with just drawing a sigil, then
Sure.
having to realize that there needs to be a change. Like, that's part of the learning process. I knew it would need to be changed, but they didn't know. So
Right.
they put their all into that first form. Then why does it need to be changed? Show them the reason it needs to be changed.
Yeah.
So much so that they want to, that they're excited to change it, even though it's going to take an hour to draw that out just in pencil again. Well, and that's the first stage. And then you can take that as a contemplative symbol, like you would the tarot trumps or anything else, and really build towards the full painted sigil this big that you stand on the floor before the table with all the implements or whatever. So in that build-up process, I'd rather have people have experience knowing both. You can follow, you can do everything that you need to do that everyone says you should do to make sure it works, and it'll work.
Sure.
But that's all you're going to know. And you might even become one of those people that tells everyone who does it with any slight deviation that they're wrong, and that they're just
Oh, there are plenty of those people.
Just fooling themselves.
Right.
But if you haven't done it, you don't know that. So and again, in a collegial magic approach like that I learned in the GD, which again was very different to my experience in the reclaiming tradition, Wicca before that in the early 90s, where it was just like, this is how we do it. There was no this is how you draw down the moon, and there's no theoretical debate about methodologies. It's like, this is what we do. And of course, if someone didn't want to do it, it's fine. But there's some in Enochian magic, you'll find people saying, you have to have this ring. Well, that of course is a key distinct factor between the Golden Dawn system and the purist approach to Enochian, where in the Golden Dawn system, you sort of, the power comes from the 5/6 initiation, and your lawman. That's sort of the ultimate tool of tools,
right?
For the adept. And then there's the fact that most of that work, most of the work is done in the vault. Well, a lot of work is done in the vault. We did a ton of work in the vault.
Sure.
And I don't really talk about that much because, again, there's no point in really talking about it much. But that's very pared down. It's, as one friend of mine who's been through like 7/4 said, always reminds me, he's like, 80% of it's all scrying. It's all scrying, right? And that's very different to the grimoire focus on physical evocation.
Sure. I don't really see them. I know there are people who see so we have kind of some camps, right? You have the pure grimoire purists, so you need all the tools, you need all the everything needs to be perfect, you need the perfect ring, you need the perfect setup, you need the rug exactly like the grimoire says, right? And then you have the other hand who's like, no, it's all in your head, it's all whatever you think, right? I think there's a middle ground from my experience, right? Ultimately, you should do it whether you have the stuff or not, because you're going to have experiences which will probably inspire you to seek for more, right? Ultimately, right? So if you have a very powerful experience using a system, you might think, I wonder what's going to happen if I have the whole setup, right? which actually might intensify things ultimately, right?
And
At the same time, you have the people who are like on the other end, like you said, you need to have everything perfectly set up or it doesn't work, which from my experience is just not valid, right? So I think there's this middle ground where, yeah, experiment with it and, you know, use what you can. However, you can, you know, you can have more experiences, you can scry more, you can upgrade your temple furniture, upgrade your knowledge, read more. I think it's more of a gradual process versus one versus the other, you know? That's my experience. But what is your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's educational. You want to teach the methodology. You want to teach them the approach, not
Sure.
just dogmatic practices. And so, yeah, they're getting to see the difference of how these things, how it evolves and how it changes as you add more things. Like one of the guys who was pretty new, he ran off and got himself a gold ring. And like the rest of us, no one else is even wearing any ring except one of us wearing a paper one.
Right.
Because that one, it wasn't required that week. Next
Right.
week it'll be, you know, the next time after that, it's we're adding things in so people can see the changes. And it's really fascinating to see the changes, because I come from a full temple tradition, from a very active temple, consecrating all your tools, doing all the grades right, like so I know how good it can get, but also I know how important it is to not be one of these people who are limited by that. And that's where you see people like go through the system, graduate, you know, and then stop practicing.
Right. Exactly.
Like, that seems sad to me. I mean, who cares really? If you want to stop practicing, that's great.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I totally agree. I totally agree. So you've been recently working with this Heptarchia Mystica conjurations, right? Have there been any notable experiences between you and your students? I mean, for me personally, I've had some incredible experiences, some transcendent experiences, visible appearances, you know, communion. I'm very curious. I mean, that's me. That's myself, right? However, you and your students, I'm sure you've had some probably notable experiences, right? I'd imagine, or maybe not. Have there been any notable things that you might want to share?
They've been surprising. They're surprising. The question that I was curious to have answered is, what really is the extent of possibility in this new pioneering space of cyber magic, which, you know, we all heard about back in the early 90s. Some people were talking about it probably in the 80s even, with some of the chaos writers.
Chaos magicians, yeah.
And you know, I never thought that would ever be me. I would never be in that space. And next thing you know, a pandemic hits, and it's like, well, I guess I'll explore what I can explore, and look into the realms that I can actually make a change in. Yeah. So what's been shocking is the effectiveness. Yeah, I would say the ritual work in cyberspace, you know, is just as dramatic and profound as in a physical temple with someone, which that's the craziest thing. And you know, we've had a lot of conversations, like we're talking a lot, because it's a little bit crazy. And it makes me think about the idea of, like, you know, the Jesuit father Teilhard de Chardin's noosphere idea of the net of consciousness surrounding the world, and sort of the manifestation of the Holy Spirit. And I'm curious. I wonder if the magic is somehow like hijacking the internet waves and being amplified or something like that, or if it's just that the good old theory that astral space is unbound by the physical limitations, that it really does work, which would make you maybe reconsider some of the debates around astral initiation. But it definitely led us to to some interesting discussions on virtual reality magic and the future of where we might go with that. It's crazy, and I'd still rather go for a walk in the woods, but hey, it might not be legal in the future, so let's keep our options open.
Sure. So what you're doing is you have kind of an online guild where people join in your live streams, they participate in these evocations, right? They do a little bit of study behind it, they participate in the experience, and nonetheless, even though they might not have all the right proper tools, they're still experiencing something for the most part. At least most of your participants, right?
Everyone has an active magical practice. They're all, you know, good chunk are you know, Masons, and you know, or OTO or GD style. But everyone's yeah, it's a definitely a magical working group, emphasis on the working. And yeah, we do weekly classes, and it's sometimes it's theory, sometimes it's workshops, sometimes it's ritual or whatever. We'll have more guest speakers come on, and just there's a lot of stuff to cover in
Sure.
there's in the curriculum and in the study, and everyone has their own practices. I'm not initiating anyone or it's no kind of order whatsoever. I'm just not going to stop teaching just because the universities have lost their minds and conferences aren't happening and the
Right.
world's gone a bit crazy. I'm not gonna stop because I don't need to. And so I'm just doing the spiritual direction thing, which is really what the main use for my master's degree anyway in divinity, right?
Sure.
That's literally what I was trained to do. And it usually is practiced in the churches across denominational lines. In fact, spiritual directors usually, it's recognized that it's a kind of counseling training, right? Where you are really looking out for that person's journey, rather than trying to get any kind of follower. That's not what it's about. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, very interesting, because you've had a lot of experience in the Golden Dawn, and you've been in pretty much all the, what would you say, the positions or the offices that.
I got to do like almost everything in the GD. I
Right.
was curator for a long time, and cancellarius, praemonstrator, sub-praemonstrator for the whole order when I was rewriting their grade material up until the schism. And past Hierophant, of course. Got to do Hierophant many 6-month terms, as well as like Hieros many times, Carix once, which is awesome. If you can ever be Carix, that's fucking awesome. And I did Carix while as an adept too. For a while, we were really rocking it, and we had enough adepts there to actually have the major and lesser officers as 5-6 members, which is crazy. That's what you hear about in like when Zaleski talks about Jack Taylor and that kind of level of work. You have people who just know this stuff inside and out, and are working it on every level, and that's when it really comes to life on a whole other plane.
Yeah, very interesting. What's another interesting thing is you've never got into thelema, right? So, for example, like that's another whole bag of.
I did a book report on Aleister Crowley in grade 8 to try and like shock my teachers, and got a schooling in Rudolf Steiner instead, and never looked back.
Right, interesting. So look what I got below my laptop. I literally have Gems of the Equinox, annotated by Israel Regardi, right?
Yep. Yeah. I know that book well.
Very good book, I gotta say. And
I definitely had all the books and read all the Crowley stuff. Right. And in fact, last year I was just rereading his Confessions. It's in the box of my stuff in California now, but hopefully I'll get it soon. And it was really different to read, as someone closer to his age when he wrote it. Like very, very different. I mean, fascinating guy, right? Like, and
sure. So like, as far as I know, I mean, we're talking a lot about Enochian magic. Aleister Crowley, he actually had he has a whole book called Vision and the Voice, Liber 418, which is scrying the whole aethers, right? He literally goes from text to lil, and he reports his whole experiences, crossing the abyss, all these kind of crazy experience, communion with Babylon and all these things, right? Whereas in the Golden Dawn, were there any adepts who recorded their experiences about working with the aethers or working with Enochian magic?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure, I mean, I would imagine there would be some, but are they reported, or is this sort of inner order stuff, or what?
It was, aethers were very, very much worked in our order, for sure. We, even at Temple Tahuti, we had the full table, the wax tablets. We still did that form of Enochian magic. We were still trained in it and did it. There's a great story actually of the praemonstrator for the order, for the great and mighty TDL, my bro and mentor. He once sort of got called out down at Temple of Isis in LA for taking some practicae 3 = 8 people into the temple and introducing them to scrying with an ether, with, I think it was probably text. Though I think it must have been Lil, because that's the closest. Crowley went the wrong way about it, right?
Interesting.
It doesn't really make sense, because you're starting at the altar, at the double cubical altar of the universe, the center of reality, going from Lil to Tex, but whatever. It sounds like he had a good time with his buddy, so you know,
Yeah.
you know, maybe the peyote gave him a short, made it opened up. He did a chaos magic working of the ethers, is what he did.
Okay, yeah, that's a good view of it. Okay.
Every time someone breaks the rules, we just call it chaos magic.
Sure. And of all things, listen, guess who I got on the podcast tomorrow, live in the flesh? Phil Hine, who's a legend in the chaos magic.
Yeah, he's the guy who got me into it. Yeah, for sure.
Literally, probably the two people that people come across in the chaos magic sphere when they first get into it are probably Peter Carroll, right? You got Libra Null and Psychonaut, right? And then you have Phil Hine, who has chaos condensed, primal chaos. He has basically a lot of the primers of chaos magic. So I have him on tomorrow, who actually is very big in the chaos magic scene, but in the past couple decades, he's been a tantric. Basically, he's been a Shiva tantricism, right? Hindu tantra. So he's really kind of moved away from chaos magic and totally into the non-dual, non-dualistic tantra, basically. So that's going to be an interesting conversation tomorrow. We're going to dive deep on it.
Yeah, I'm very excited. Yeah. Hey, we're all. Yeah, there's some interesting. And you know, so our buddy Sean just talked to Georgina on LVX files.
I gotta check that out.
Oh man, and you won't believe who he has next after, especially if you've paid attention to Twitter. Oh my God. Anyway, I won't say more.
Any spoilers? No.
The fact that I'm not saying anything should be spoiler enough.
Okay, interesting.
Anyway, so TDL took these practical out of order members in to do Enochian scrying with them to teach them scrying, and people were like, how what are you doing? They can't really call him out because he's literally in charge of everything, despite what people think that it was Zinc. That's he was the one who ran things and taught and trained everyone.
This is Zinc, right? Zinc.
No, not Zinc. Zinc didn't do it. Voldemort did not do that much stuff at all.
No Voldemort, huh? Hey, wait a minute. I'm going to interrupt you. You said I have this book here. Can you see this?
Yeah.
This is by Athena Wallander, who I believe
she's just down the street from me here.
She is a Temple Tahuti initiate, right?
Well, she was an initiate of the order, but when she was a member, it was a sanctuary. It was being run only by a single adept, Frater R.C. Nineveh Shadrach. Was running it as a solo adept then, and it wasn't until his two top students got initiated into 5/6, and then he left that they ran it as a full temple, and so it was a full temple when I joined in '96, but they weren't doing initiations yet, not till '97, which worked out perfectly for me because I was in Vienna in between.
Okay, interesting. Okay,
jet setting.
But you've had some interaction with her, I'd imagine.
Oh yeah, and we've talked. We did Enochian working together with Lon.
Awesome.
And we've always meant to hang out when I was in town, but
Interesting. Yeah, pretty good book, I gotta say. Pretty good book. I would say that it's interesting because what I like about this book specifically, very experimental. So she gives a little bit of the Golden Dawn and Crowley approach, but then also a little bit of the purist approach and a little bit of ideas for the future and different kind of experimentation, which I think is pretty cool. It really shows when reading this book is that this person has really actually worked with the system, had some experiences, and really gives you kind of ideas, which I like, right? Rather than just theory, it's a very hands-on, practical manual, I would say, which is pretty cool. I like that.
Yeah.
Gotta admit,
So we never met at that temple at the time. Plus, I was 15, so they didn't let me be a part of any group stuff until I was 16. So I didn't meet people that first year, which was cool. I had private lessons.
Sure.
Fucking rocked. Damn, good times. It's cool that you have her book. She has some interesting theories. So she and Nineveh Shadrach, I hear, did a lot of Ishtar and Venus stuff back in the early days of Temple Sanctuary of Tahuti.
Yeah, very
Yeah,
interesting.
some wild magic they were doing. When groups are starting off up, they all do a bit of wild stuff. It seems they really experiment a lot more, and then
Mhm,
they get larger and more codified
mhm.
and rigid, and then they break apart again. I was just reading about that with the old Order of the Golden Rosy Cross in Frater R.C.'s book.
Oh, interesting.
Um,
Hold on a
so
second.
me and me
I
and a
actually
student just
really,
finished reading this together.
I really want to read that book. Can you tell me a little bit
Yeah.
about that book?
Well, it's missing more full stops than anything I've ever read in my life.
Okay.
Like like the I don't think there is a period in German vielleicht. I don't know. I'm just
Okay.
joking. I'm just joking. But
Okay.
it's a beautiful book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell us
Like
a little bit about so what exactly does that it's Rosicrucian magic, Frater Acker, right? The
yeah,
German adept. So what does it cover? Did you learn anything from it? Is it worth
well
reading? What's your take on
a lot of it's in German.
it?
Um
Okay.
which I like. Like there's whole chapters in German, but it's all translated as well. But
Okay.
I like having the whole ritual and it's fun for me. But he does some weird things like redefining white and black magic in a way that I think is pretty useless.
Okay.
Um, but the one of the most interesting things was the ritual he included from uh, the old Order of the Golden Rosy Cross,
Okay.
um, by one of its founders who was sort of either kicked out or disempowered towards the end of his life. And this is 18th century we're talking, and wrote this ritual that basically was this the empty hand path, and it was sort of written as though to his son. Who knows if that was actually what it was passed on to? Because if it was, then the son probably would have destroyed it, and we wouldn't have it in archives. But it's a ritual of based on a basic tree of life Agrippa formulation of the Sephiroth and the invoking the divine names and hierarchies and their Jewish prophet, to initiate yourself. I think you're standing in the ocean when you're doing this, or maybe you have an altar. There's different phases, but overall, it's an initiatory ritual for uh, for everything, but emphasizing that you're not joining any order. It's an invisible college style ritual. There's no members, there's no orders anymore, there's no temples, there's no rituals. You're pure, free, open Rosicrucian mystic after that, and that's all there is.
Okay.
Um, and what's interesting is you can see that this guy who wrote it, having formed this one of the oldest and most sort of renowned Rosicrucian orders of the past, 300 years ago. Um, when he got disenfranchised and when his order had grown so formal and rigid that
Uh-huh.
he was of no longer used to it, he formulated this ritual initiation at the end of his life that could be used by his hypothetical or real son to,
Uh-huh.
to get what he got before he felt that it became calcified and
Okay.
useless. It's like if you can't do that, then you can do this, and maybe we should all do this anyway. It seemed like a very sort of end of life realization of what the core of the mystical path is, and I think that's beautiful. That's wonderful.
Very
So
interesting. So it's sort of, would you say the book is like a collection of rituals and essays and things like that? Is that
no,
what it?
there's just the one ritual.
Okay.
It's sort of like a mixture of historical documents
Okay.
and
Commentary.
philosophy of the like Rosicrucian philosophy and what it means and what it is. And I think some of the stuff, the emphasis on Ma'at, and which is big focus through Teme and the GD style as well. But I
Uh-huh.
think that comes from the Querea Josephine McCarthy
Uh-huh.
ethos that he's a part of. But it's still quite lovely to read what it is to live as Ma'at. Um, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Would you recommend the book, or what's your
Oh
overall?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely if you're at all interested in Rosicrucianism, it's kind of a important addition.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
I mean,
I've been
there's not
considering
many.
picking it up. I haven't
Yeah,
bought it yet, but I've been considering checking it out. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. There's not many people making that kind of contribution in that field,
Okay.
and no matter what percentage of it you wholeheartedly feel an affinity to, it's what you connect with is going to be significant, I would say. And,
Okay.
and understanding some of the history, like it's a great corrective to a lot of the other nonsense that I've had to read recently for this. I've been absent from my podcast and everything, as people might have noticed, and not that posting that much online because I've got deadlines for writing, and I'm in full writing and research mode mainly, other than the classes. And some of the stuff I've been reading that's come out since I last paid attention is absurd, is insane, like, you know, and like in Liam Thomas Christopher's Kabbalah, Magic, and the Great Work of Self-Transformation,
Sure.
he mentions that in the Golden Dawn's formation, they invented this grade structure and then fabricated some connection to Rosicrucianism that didn't exist, just to sort of sell themselves more to their members, which were mostly drawn from the Theosophical Society, Annie Kingsford's Hermetic Society, and but also the artistic community and such. So which is just such nonsense for someone, even for any Golden Dawn adept, to make that kind of gross error in basic history is crazy. And the fact that people then are running off with these absurd impressions of it. For example, like the Golden Dawn was founded by William Wynne Westcott. He didn't fabricate a Rosicrucian connection. He was the supreme magus of the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia. The reason there's a Rosicrucian connection to the Golden Dawn is because it was founded by the supreme magus who became the supreme magus of the SRIA. That's the connection. It's a direct connection from this order to this order, and the grade structure came from them. But actually, even the grade structure goes back before that to the OGRC, or as Frater R.C calls it, the OGR, probably because it's from the German Ordner Rosenkreuz.
Christian Rosenkreuz.
Well, OGR is in German. I don't know if it had a German name, Ordner Goldene Rosenkreuz, but OGRC makes sense because it's like the OGRC, and their name was the Order of the Golden Rosy Cross. And they were sort of the big Rosicrucian order that existed in the 1700s. And they came up with that grade structure. So it's like right there you have 300 years of transmission and adaptation of the same structure, just adding more and more and different things to it along the way, based on serving the needs of the time and the place, is my hermeneutic estimation of that, which I think is essential to really looking at the way the vicissitudes and transformations and developments within any system of magic or spirituality or thought whatsoever. You have to look at its relationship to the time and place if you want to understand why it was being done this way.
Sure. Yeah, very interesting. I do want to pick up that book. I think I'm going to check it out. I did read Frater R.C.'s Holy Daimon, which is a pretty good book because it goes over different sort of. I like the style of that book. I don't know if you've read that, The Holy Daimon. Have you read that?
I've seen glimpses of it, but no.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
One of my students just went through White Magic, Black Abbot.
I do want to read that. I have not read that one.
Yeah,
that
it's all sort of interesting. I put it as like for me, like Frater R.C and like Jake Stratton Kent. It's like anytime I have a chance for enjoyable reading, I dive into that stuff because I like some of this stuff I disagree with more than the stuff I agree with, you know, because it's
food
like,
for thought.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of things that I disagreed with, and that took like 3, 5, 7 years to gestate, maybe for some more experimentums to take place, and then I realized, damn, I think that might be right. Like I got turned around.
Right?
I got turned around from the dualism to the spirit model of like just like I'm still, there might be something demonic about demons or unclean spirits, might be something demonic about unclean spirits, but there also, you know, but there also might not be. It might just be our perception, you know, if you're at this, if you go into this divine frequency of hyperspace that's full of light and love, and then you take a look down into something clepothic, you're going to be like, oh, that's evil. But if that's where you started, maybe you're at home there. And,
exactly.
And so the moralism doesn't hold up metaphysically.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, recently, now you're talking about Frater R.C. I just picked up this. I don't know if you can see it on the screen. Jake Stratton Kent just came out with a new book called
Yes, I heard.
Night School Volume 1. I like the title. Night School Volume 1, The Sworn and Secret Grimoire by the Master Arbitel, translated for our age by Count Abaca. So what it looks like, I haven't read it yet. I just picked it up. But it looks sort of like a Arbitel. He's working with the Olympian spirits of the Arbitel. And so it's sort of a how-to grimoire, how to use grimoires, and specifically working with the Arbitel to use evocation is what it looks like to me. So I'm going to read it. I'm going to try to do a little bit of experimentation with it. And I do want to have Jake on, which would be great to explain, you know, it's sort of a how-to grimoire, which isn't really out there, right? Like everyone has their theories and whatnot, but it looks like an interesting book. So I'm going to definitely read it, work with it, and try to interview him and see what the whole process is. You know, it'll be an interesting one because Jake Stratton Kent, like you said, Frater R.C, Jake Stratton Kent, they're really pushing the boundaries of, they're putting a lot of good new ideas. Like you said, maybe you might not agree with it, maybe you do. I think the more important thing is sort of mixing things up and making you think, right? Sort of giving you a different perspective. I like that.
Right,
I really like
right.
that. I think that's important. That's value in itself, right?
Yeah, seeing different, like, you know, the interpretations are one thing, but the experiences are another. So when I read John King, it's the experiences he relates of dealing with these goetic spirits is fascinating, especially how he handles them and all of that stuff. Some of the conclusions and interpretations he draws from them, I might take issue with. One good example of that is really interesting. You know, he notes throughout the interactions and demonstrates in the diary entries in the Imperial Art the deceptive nature of goetic spirits, and how clear that is, and you see that it's related in his accounts. And so on certain things he'll challenge them, assuming that they're lying. But on other conclusions he draws based on information they give him, because he wants them to be true, he assumes that they're just spouting divine factual reality, like that Jesus was just a man, not special at all.
Okay, interesting.
Right? That sounds like you want that to be true. Otherwise, why would they be lying? Maybe just from their perspective, he's not divine or anything. And I'm not arguing either side of that at all. I think Jesus was absolutely a man. If he existed at all.
Right.
No,
Who knows? That's a debate in itself, right?
There's probably just a couple of them. I don't know. Who knows? The historical Jesus debate's it's a weird one.
That is a weird one. I mean, who really knows, right?
I'm very familiar with it. Remember when that coffin came out with the inscription and stuff? It was like professors of mine that were part of the team contributing to the analysis of what it meant by James, brother of Jesus, and that sort of stuff. So I was in theological school at the time, and we had it was part of our education in a big way, like learning how to interpret. Because what does you really have to understand that the word brother would have been applied like the way you and me call each other brother, for sure.
Sure.
Whereas in our culture today, we wouldn't write that on a tombstone.
Right.
I wouldn't, on my tombstone, I wouldn't say that you're my brother.
Right.
People would be like, oh, he had a brother. He never mentioned that.
Interesting.
Back then, that was not what it would have implied.
Sure.
We know that by looking at other archaeological and historical and textual examples very precisely and very closely, and extensively. You look at everything. Whenever you interpret anything, passage of the Hebrew Bible, at that level, you're comparing the key words to every reference you can find in all the Midrash Rabbah, the Targumim, and everything like that. You have to. Otherwise, you're probably just missing out a ton of insight just for a little bit of laziness.
Yeah, very interesting. I think that's an interesting point. So what do you see the difference between, this is something I'm very interested in. So you read a lot of books, but you also do a lot of work and have direct experience, right? So what is the balance there? Is it like, do you lean more heavily towards what your experience relates to you and interpret it that way? Or is it you read books? I think that's something that people, I probably see extremists on both ends, but what's your interpretation? Like, ultimately, if you had to lean back on one, right? Is it your direct experience that's the most, solidifies your mindset or your perspective, or is it the books and your studies? What would you say on that?
I think it's the tension
Okay.
that
Yeah.
is created between the interplay of the two that is most important.
Okay.
That's what keeps you in outside your comfort zone. That's what keeps you in the zone, and helps you maintain that sort of flow state in life that is very congruent with any kind of divine or true will or self, and just harmonious to being most authentically you.
Okay.
That's what I think. Yeah, I could be wrong.
No, I like that. I like that. That's a good interpretation. Um, I've actually recently been downloading and reading a lot of the Tantra stuff. I've been going kind of old school. So I started out more of the Eastern path, I guess you would say, right? Like Buddhism, Tantra, things along these lines, right? And then I went more into the Western sort of the esotericism, the Rosicrucianism, Golden Dawn, Crowley, Enochian, these kind of things, right? Um, One thing you see in sort of there's like the non-dual school, even in okay. So for example, you have David Heim Smith, who is extremely like non-dual Kabbalah, that kind of thing, right? And then there's the emanationist theory. I'm curious, what's your take? You've read things like this, you've had experiences. What's your take on that? Because you
Yeah.
have
Well,
on both ends, on the Western and the Eastern, you have the non-dual, non-emanationists, and then you also on both ends of the schools, right? Both on the East and the West, you have non-dual versus the emanationists. What's your take on that?
well, yeah.
Or is there even
I'm of the same thinking of David Heimsmith, and that's what made, I think, our interview so fun on my podcast, Magic Without Fears.com,
yes?
whatever.
Yeah.
Because I realized that's who I was talking to, and I wasn't quite sure of that before,
Mhm.
because I hadn't read all his works. They're I hadn't got his books yet, and I've read
Sure.
some of his stuff now, and I've been going through his 32 keys, like his little videos on each of the keys, which you can go to his site, are amazing. I
Mhm.
watched the first two many times, and that's where I'm at. Like the second one, I'm still trying to wrap my head around a little bit,
Okay.
though the first one has really codified a lot of thinking,
Okay.
and that's actually impacted my work. It's something I was always aware of. Well, he's expressing ideas and concepts in different ways,
Okay.
which are very powerful if you're, whether you know Hebrew or not. But
Mhm.
the fact that it's my thing is just sucks me right in, and
Okay.
like, yeah. So yeah, um and in my writings, in my main work, I express the same sort of understanding of how the subject is defined, especially ethically but spiritually, um, in the context of the moment that defines oneself.
Okay.
um, and actually that's my main academic book, The Ethics of Understanding God.
Mm.
And actually, on Wednesday, I'm doing a podcast with a PhD who wants to talk to me about it, who's just read it, and
Okay.
that'll be the first time I've ever spoken about it
Uh-huh.
publicly with a doctor who has read the book.
Okay.
Obviously, I spoke about it a lot with the 4 PhDs who guided me through the research and writing.
Okay.
Um, but I've never actually. So that'll be fun. That'll be my next podcast, man.
There you go. There
Crazy,
you go.
hey? That'll be some intense shit. Getting into it philosophically,
Mm.
with a prof on the channel. But yeah, I think all is one, and the but studying the expression of the oneness is what the Kabbalah is about as well, right?
Sure.
You just don't have to see it as in an ontologically emanationist perspective, and he has some points about that, and that the points about that he makes is what makes that school of mysticism so fascinating. Yeah, and it raises a lot of questions and answers a lot of questions, even just to the extent that I've gone through the first couple keys. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. 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 So he is also. I've never spoken with him, but he's also like an adept of. He studies like Dzogchen, like Tibetan Buddhism as well, right? Isn't he sort of a? I mean, he studies in depth the Kabbalah, the Jewish Kabbalah, but also, I think he's an adept of he's a Dzogchen monk as well, like half of the year or something like that, right? So he really brings in like both the Eastern mysticism and the Western Kabbalah and things like this, right?
Yeah, yeah. Though I don't see much Eastern stuff in his writing.
Okay.
It's pretty much Kabbalah, like, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, he's representing an oral tradition that hasn't really been expressed before, and that's exciting whenever some rabbis or whatever say, hey, yeah, you know what, just get this out there. You're the guy to do that.
Okay.
If I, you know, if you were teaching a student in this long oral tradition, and he's just published two more books, right? The Gates of Light, um,
Right.
and
The Fountain of Wisdom, the old
Fountain of Wisdom, right? No, sorry,
Fountain of
not
Wisdom.
Gates of Light,
Yes,
Fountain of
yes.
Wisdom. Yeah, yeah. No, I can't wait to get those.
Mhm.
And so he's representing this tradition of Kabbalah that hasn't been expressed too much.
Sure.
It is related very similarly to the Abulafian practice that me and most people know, because Kaplan's meditation on the Kabbalah was the main supplement to Kabbalah that most Golden Dawn people would go to for practices, and you have enough there already for a lifetime, actually, if you take it seriously. So
Okay.
but that's more of the Abulafian school, and Heim-Smith is the sort of the sister system to that sort of way of thinking, as he explained it to me. So that's really cool. It makes sense that it was very easy for me to slip into that, but I'm still slipping into it because I don't actually have the time to go at it full bore, and it's not the kind of thing you need to rush either, as he himself would tell you.
Sure.
And each book is self-contained and for anyone, and he writes in a very poetically lovely, mystical way that is inviting and absorbing. Yeah, you really want to have no other distractions when you're reading that
Interesting. Yes.
stuff. Yeah,
I
it's a
actually have two.
ritual.
I have two of his, but I haven't read any of his books. Oddly enough, I think I have three of his books on my bookshelf, but I haven't read them yet. So I'm gonna have to start cracking into that.
Yeah, one thing people get wrong a lot in the magical community about the Kabbalah is a lot of people, you'll hear people say things like, um, spiritual transformation or progression can't just be some mind game. You have to actually do it like this or do it like that, and
Okay.
have this wide range of experiences and full holistic transformation. But not in Kabbalah. There's traditions within Kabbalah that are for sure like that, but there's also traditions within Kabbalah that are analytically based. The idea is that through analysis, using your mind, you get there as well. And so the act of then just reading the book, that's why you have all these rabbis teaching mystical stories and get of like, oh, all the boy did was look at the letters, and then the angel came and saved him, or something like that,
Sure.
um, even though they couldn't read them. So this idea of analytical or mental or uh, logos spirituality is what it sort of is. Like, it's logos spirituality in a way. And it's very common in the contemplative traditions to see this emphasis on the contemplation of written word, as well as all the other aspects of magical or mystical practices that they do include.
Yeah. Sure. Interesting. Yeah. Um, what do you see? So you've been through the whole Golden Dawn system, right? And there's a big difference between Hermetic Kabbalah and perhaps Jewish Kabbalah. Do you think that do you see a big distinction, or do you see value in learning both of them? I mean, there's other guys who say skip the Hermetic Kabbalah, go straight to the Jewish Kabbalah, right? And
Well,
vice versa.
you need,
What
yeah,
do you think about
there's no escaping Hermetic Kabbalah if you're
that? Okay.
looking at certain magical traditions,
Sure.
right? Like, if you have to know these hierarchies of angels associated with these sephira, and you're doing the Kabbalistic cross with Gevurah and Hesed reversed from the way they are in Jewish Kabbalah, like, that's a
Sure.
heresy. That's the Christian element of heresy within Hermetic and Christian Kabbalah, which
Okay.
is what Hermetic Kabbalah is. It's the idea that you reverse that because you're stepping back into the tree. That's a key crucial difference. There's nowhere in Jewish Kabbalah you're ever going to see those two things getting reversed. It's always, Hesed is always would be on the right shoulder. We are the reflection of God in Hermetic Kabbalah. We are the Tselem, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, that's one difference of Hermetic Kabbalah. But you need that if you're going to do even the LBRP with a Kabbalistic cross, because you're doing that. It's why a lot of people will face west in doing the middle pillar, because they're stepping back into the tree and they want to emphasize that. It's
Sure. Sure.
not
Sure.
not that's not universal, but All that idea is one of the defining differences. And then there's a bunch of other ones, of course, but it doesn't prevent you from practicing the Kabbalistic practices on their own ground, especially since this is a magical approach to these things, is looking at operational effectiveness.
Sure,
right?
sure. So you are part of a Golden Dawn temple. Do you think the future, you are part of a formal temple, now you do this kind of online community, you have your own, what is it, Hermetic Mystery School.com? Can you tell us?
Yeah.
Is that the name?
Well, I do a free monthly lecture that anyone can come to, and then weekly classes, which are awesome and exciting. I mean, it's wonderful. And then sometimes I'll record them, and you can take study individual techniques if you just want to do your own thing, and I'll present techniques as succinctly as I can, but as comprehensively as I can, outlining in a perspective from across different traditions, and letting people know about variations that are done, just so that if you don't have access to anything else, you can at least get, as best you can, a full perspective of the range of things.
What do you think is the role of the online school, the online guild, versus solo practitioner versus joining a temple? What do you see? Are there distinctions there? What do you see? Do you think the future is more leaning towards online or solo? What do you see there? I'm very curious about that, because I see there's a lot of online stuff going on now, which looks really cool. Gives a lot of people a chance to interact with people, do experiments together, work with somebody who has experience. And then, there's solo people who just do their own thing, without mentors or working with other people. And less so these days, you see, I mean, the actual temple stuff exists still, but maybe because of COVID, there's a lot less of that going on. And, what do you see the distinction there being?
I think if online education is done right, then you're going to, I'm not trying to teach people to know less than me. I want people to know as much, if not more than me, so that we can work together better, and so that there's more people out there to work with them and learn and grow with. So if we can do the online stuff well in a way that creates passionate and competent and knowledgeable magicians, they can more easily go out and create physical locations.
Sure.
Not physical
So I like that answer, because you don't see it as one against the other. It's more of they sort of feed off each other. So you can learn online, and you can start your own thing in person too.
Yeah, because magic has a built-in sort of fail-safe. I can teach you a bunch of theory for a ritual right here and now.
Sure.
But it doesn't mean anything if you don't go and do it.
Right.
So you have to get offline and go do a bunch of stuff, probably including painting a sigil on a canvas or on wood, and the whole process, even if you no matter how you slice it, it's a lot of stuff.
That's
even if you just wanted to draw it out quickly on a paper and then go do this thing, you're probably going to take a cleansing shower and put on your robe or whatever, and dose yourself with incense and oils. Why not? Why wouldn't you do that? That's part of the process. And so that's a lot of physical activity for just something to result from me just spouting a little bit of theory at you right now. Go do this, and then you got to go spend hours doing that, maybe on Wednesday at sunrise. So magic done right manifests. Even the educational aspect of it manifests very profoundly in the world. So that amount of time we spend talking online or doing classes online is truly the tip of the iceberg of the bulk of the work that is then necessitated for the person to do. Otherwise, they're just wasting everyone's time in the first place.
It's just entertainment, right? So when you're in Temple of the Hootie, they follow up, right? Did you do it? Where's your magical journals?
No, they never did that.
They never did.
Okay, we didn't monitor journals. That's become increasingly common, I think, in magical groups, but we never thought that was necessary. I mean, the tests were
detailed.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 3 hour written test, so if you pass that, you're good to go. It's not hard, you know, the rest is between you and your own conscience and higher self.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah,
at the end of the day, you're only cheating yourself. No one, you know,
right.
I don't care if you have profound experiences necessarily, like if you don't, and because I can't create them for you, you have to participate. I can't participate for you.
Sure. What is something you think that the magical people are missing, perhaps? And on the vice versa, normies, I guess, I don't know, just people not interested in this stuff. You know, so if there's somebody who's doing a lot of magic, interested in these kind of things, what do you find commonly that they're missing? Is there something that they're lacking or they're not seeing? And on the same end, normal people, I guess you would say, or people who are not interested in this area, do you see them as also lacking something? Because you have a lot of experience in this area. Do you see any sort of lacks on both ends of the spectrum, or are there any patterns you notice? I'm very interested in that. So it's kind of like, do you see like magical people, do they kind of neglect Malkuth? Do they neglect their physical realm, their health, or are there any patterns that you've noticed after, you know, being interested in this area for the past couple decades or what have you?
Well, yeah, I think it might be the variety is just too wide to
Yeah, it's a broad question. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah, no, because I
Case by case kind of thing.
you only hear about certain types of people, right?
Okay.
And when you consider all the people who practice that you never meet or hear about, that don't go to conferences, don't mess around on Facebook, I mean, yeah, I think and that's the majority of people, or the majority are the ones you don't hear about. The ones talking are the ones who, you know, are always on Facebook, clearly aren't doing anything else.
Yeah. Sure. You can log into
know,
any given Facebook group and it's all a bunch of people posting and fighting and arguing, right?
yeah. So they're probably part of the minority of practitioners,
Okay,
logically,
that's a good point.
you
That's a
know.
good point, right? They're
Yeah,
the most vocal, but they might be
yeah.
the minority, right?
It's like with all that other like all the crazy stuff on Twitter. It's like a
Sure.
small percentage of people. Yeah, you can see that when things on people on YouTube or Twitter get ratioed, right?
Sure.
And you're like, oh yeah, so those are glimpses into what the majority actually thinks. Because once in a while they step out and are just like, no, we don't like that. That's
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting, very interesting. The vibe that I get though is like looking online, the vibe I get is that like the Golden Dawn and the Crowley stuff is sort of, when I read a lot of stuff, it's like that's outdated. You can just skip that. It's all about the old grimoires, right? I get a lot of that when I read Facebook groups and stuff like that. It's sort of like, yeah, you know, you can learn a little bit of basic hermetics or things like that, but they didn't know what they're talking about. Crowley or the Golden Dawn were sort of working off unfinished manuscripts or imperfect material. You can just skip all that. That's kind of what I read a lot online. That's what I see a lot online, right?
Well, see, that makes sense if you consider that, like the kinds of histories these people are reading from books like that,
Sure.
like Christopher. You know, if these people aren't reading like these people aren't reading the good books that really show a fuller perspective, like you in right here in Stephen Skinner's and Francis King's Techniques of High Magic, you go from the most preliminary thing, you know, what is magic, to how to evoke to physical appearance, all in less than 250 pages. That's pretty dense. Like, if someone's like, oh, I read that, it's like, oh, what's that mean? Well, you know, I read that, and then I start. It's like, so there's no reason, like, you didn't do it, because right there you have 5 years at least.
Right.
That's 5 years. Did you do it?
Right. Yeah, good point. That's a good point. That's a good point.
Right? And are you going to tell me that he doesn't know what he's talking about because he never studied any grimoires, really, this Mr. Skinner, whoever?
Right.
You know,
Right.
this is the guy. This is Mr. Grimoire, and this is
Right.
his version of an introductory manual of self-initiation. You want to get into this stuff? Here's the basics. Here
Right.
is, this is, when someone, the people you're talking about say, yeah, you can do a bit of Hermetic stuff. There you go. This is a bit. 5 years.
Right. 5 years. Yeah. Good
What
point.
the problem is, your standards of what a little bit of practice is now is shrunk to such a minuscule 5-second TikTok amount that no wonder you end up like giving up, because you have no idea what this stuff is capable of.
Yeah, I like your answer. I do like your answer. I mean, I think that with so much material out there, it's a blessing and a curse, right? In other words, you have so many things to study, so many new books, so
And
many
that's,
historical reprints, but at the same time, that's all that can be. That's This is just my opinion, and you
yeah,
can. I
that's
mean, it can be
exactly
mental
why I joined the
masturbation.
Golden Dawn.
It can be mental masturbation, right?
So
Are you doing
when I was
right?
15, that's why I joined the Golden Dawn,
Right.
because I had been initiated. My first physical initiation was in 1988 into the
Awesome.
yogic tradition. I practiced that, meditating twice a day
Yeah.
from 1988 to, I did another initiation when I turned 10. And those were beautiful ceremonies that really opened me up a lot, and probably explained a lot of the later early developing sensitivity and psychism and all that. And then from, I lived in an OTO oasis when I was 10, and ended up with this Regardi's Tree of Life in my things when we moved out. And a couple years later I read that.
Uh-huh.
And by the time I was 15, I was feeling a little overwhelmed, because I read all this stuff, but it didn't really congeal in a solid way, even though I'd gone through Don Craig's curriculum and stuff like that. And that's why I joined the GD, because I just wanted to know the stuff I needed to know to do all the ritual work. I needed an actual magical training. Here's the quickest, most concise way that we do all these things. And also, how much do we do these things? How much do we practice each of these things? What are the things that you just need to hear from other practitioners that never get written in a book because no one thought to say it?
Right.
And you study with so many people for so intensely for such a concise period of time. When you graduate from those 7 grades or 5 grades, whatever you choose to get through, right, there's a natural break for people who to want to do less time, as the way I see it. Like, that's not actually in depth. If you find that amount of education in depth, I don't know what to tell you, because there's not that much Kabbalah. There's not that much of anything. There's enough so that you know what you need to know to do these practices and not be totally in the dark, right?
Sure.
It is a jumping off point. And every one of us who's done this for decades and decades knows that. And it's is training themselves over a long game, because they don't plan on stopping anytime soon. And why would you, if you, like Stephen Skinner and Ashton Chassan and all those guys talk about, are focused on physical manifestations? Like, that's the shit most people don't think really happens. But they never take the whole system seriously enough to find out for themselves.
Okay. Good answer. Good answer. Uh, so yeah, very interesting kind of thought. What is your sort of view on magic? Is it sort of the theurgic? Are we working towards this divine union, this sort of union with, the cosmos, with the Godhead, or is it something else? Is it sort of sorcery, or is that a false dichotomy?
Yeah, it's a broad term that
Mhm.
contains a lot of disciplines within it.
Right.
Right? Geomancy's magic,
Sure.
right?
Right.
Certainly, especially in the process by which you do the core aspect of the divination. I mean, you're essentially you're invoking the gnomes from the fairy kingdom
Sure.
or the watchtower in the north, however you see it. It's a gnomish magical act that connects you with the stars in some way. And yeah.
Do you see a big distinction between magic and mysticism?
Oh yeah.
Or
Yeah,
do they
of
work
course.
together? Are they
No,
complementary? Or are they?
I mean,
Huh?
mysticism is not necessarily a part of magic at all. Like Skinner likes to say that magic isn't spirituality.
Oh, okay.
I would say that it might could argue it's de facto part of your spirituality because you practice it, and we all have spiritualities. But from another perspective, maybe not, because it's a technology of practices that have been passed down and should be studied and validated on their own merit
Right.
through this tradition that they've been passed down. And he's right when he points out that there's a reason that the core practices haven't really changed. That's why you don't see every 100 years or so magic being completely rewritten.
Mm.
We've never had a Harry Potter formulation of magic, despite the fact in the actual traditions in history of magic, despite the fact that that's the prevalent presentation of it in fiction, in a lot of fiction, is this sort of
Mm-hmm.
Wingardium Leviosa supernaturalist approach, which obviously doesn't work. Otherwise, we'd all be like throwing fireballs.
Well, there are. I mean, you have Franz Barden who talks about that, right?
Well, yeah, he was exploring something there.
Right.
Yeah. But you don't see that stuff at all in the history of magic. That's not what magic is.
Right.
And there is an actual tradition of magical techniques and technologies that have been used to do a lot of things. The interaction with spirits is certainly a primary thing, but also invocation of the gods and rituals of initiation and transformation that are done with the aid of God or gods, and then lead to improved ways of interacting with spirits, subjugating spirits, learning from spirits, and discovering out knowledge. Mostly it was about interested in acquiring knowledge, and that's still very much something that it's used for today, to explore the limits of knowledge. That's what people like us are doing in the entheogenic realm with ritual magic, and exploring and asking questions about what reality is based on our experiences there, and how those experiences can change based on certain magical technologies, whether it's sound frequencies, rituals, sigils, you name it, crop circles.
Yeah, I see that. I do see that. Yeah, I see that. But I do
limits
see a
of
lot
knowledge.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. But I do see people arguing that there's the psychological model, the spirit model, the energy model. I mean,
to quote Stephen Skinner, the psychological model has largely been discredited.
Has largely been discredited.
I think it's a shame that as much as I love Aaron Leach, he wrote an article that sort of emphasized it as a problem, thus sort of highlighting an issue that I didn't think was really there. As much as Rigardi should be credited for using his psychoanalytic education and training to explore the psychological realms and aspects of magic, because there's definitely psychology,
it's valid on its own plane.
That's not what it is. I mean, psychology is a new thing that still is highly creative, let's say. I mean, the subconscious it's not really a thing. The superconscious, subconscious, that's not really a thing.
Right.
That's not tried and tested.
They're ideas.
It's a theory, a working theory, or a methodology that probably at its best is heuristic and going to get us to a further help us maybe ask enough questions and do enough studies that we get to a further understanding of a greater view of the truth of what's going on. And I think entheogens is a big part of that, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So it's like, when Leach emphasized that in that famous article about psychological and spirit models, I think it reignited people taking a psychological approach.
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't read that article.
Dichotomy, because that was no one ever, in my experience from childhood onward, ever talked about this stuff like it was all a code for some sort of mental programming.
Sure. However, that's a popular approach. You'd be surprised. There are a lot of people who do see these practices as being sort of a psychological hack, I guess you would say, right? So you use, for example, the LBRP, it's like it's going to open your mind. It opens new parts of your brain, which might be valid, right? You do these practices and it actually might, because everything is
Of
as
course it
above,
does.
so below. If you believe in as above, so below, it probably does tune into different parts of your,
Well, that's my
actual
point.
physical,
Rigardi,
yeah,
Rigardi did that study for us. He was the guy who went and said, "Hey, look, this is what's happening on a psychological level,"
right,
right?
right,
He never said that it only exists on a psychological level, right?
right,
Jason's new film approach is so excellent because he's familiar with these things like NLP that I don't really know anything about and don't care too much about, but it doesn't hurt to hear more. Like whenever I do come across it, it's interesting, but then I forget about it and move on. But for some people that's going to be very, very, some people really lock into it and think that's amazing and they really get it and it resonates with them and that's cool. He
right.
looks at that stuff, but he's still talking about actual spiritual beings that exist in some spiritual land that we still don't understand, but
Exactly.
seem to tend to encounter in certain ways, either ritually in trance states or on DMT.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very good point. Very good point. I think ultimately, what would you say? I think ultimately being reductionist is the problem, right? Like everything is in your mind, everything is spirit. It's probably a mix of both, right? It's probably some things are mental, some things are on that plane, some things are on the spirit plane, some things are on the energetic plane, right? But being like trying to fit everything into a box, I see is problematic, right? It's very narrow-minded, it's very dogmatic, it's very
Very
limited.
Victorian.
It's a very narrow reality tunnel. It's not being able
It,
to switch between different paradigms and has to
it's
be this versus this. It seems very low level to me, you
it's
know?
Victorian and structuralist. I mean,
Yeah.
structuralism is what is we see it in linguistics so wonderfully useful. It's breaking everything down into boxes.
Right.
Structuralism is what people usually mean when they say the popular phrase deconstruct.
Uh-huh.
Um, what they are meaning popularly is actually referred to as structuralism. And then philosophically, deconstructionism is something totally different, which I'll be discussing with a professor on Wednesday. And
Oh, nice.
we'll look at that stuff because he's written some very nice comments about my book, which is awesome. Which it's very flattering. So very excited to hear
Hmm.
what he thinks of of that work. Anyway,
Yeah, sounds very interesting. What are some what are some areas, because you're currently exploring the Heptarchia Mystica and you're doing a lot of work with that. Are there any like future plans you have for your Hermetic Mystery School? Any things that you're excited about working with or
well,
directions you want to take
right
it?
now there's one class a week. There's about 10 or so of us, give or take, at present, but hopefully we'll grow to be able to have 2-3 classes a week,
Okay.
and more guest speakers and stuff like that, and just have a fun open community. Like I said, it's composed of Masons, Druids, OTO, Thelemite, GD, initiates, and non and ex initiates. Like it's a mixed bag. Again, people who just want to study the techniques of magic.
Okay.
That's what we're doing. We're studying the techniques of magic. And people have their own practice. I don't oversee at all what anyone does on their own. And if we decide to do group practices, then that comes out of a group discussion or a desire,
Okay.
because we didn't know if it would be fun, if it would engage us, and it turned out to be the most amazing thing ever. And we're all very excited about that. So
Yeah, that's
crazy.
cool.
That's like the difference between like following Stenwick's model of the first and second Enochian call to create a micro or macrocosmic experience, or both, was absolutely worked exactly as he said it would. And it was quite crazy because
Yeah.
when focused on using the call just for the micro experience, and his whole thing is a theory in the first place, because
Right.
there's gaps in the heptarchical grimoire that we have to complement and draw from other assumptions and sources to make work,
Right.
which is why none of this purist stuff, either grimoire or Enochian, is ever truly pure, because
Right.
just like Ashen Shasan says, like he follows that stuff, but he'll still tell you what he draws in. And when he
Right.
podcasts with me, he's like, he'll use Golden Dawn signs, like Harpocrates and Horus, when he feels they're appropriate, and he incorporates a lot of stuff to make it work, and that's the
Right.
thing, right? So it's never about purism, really. It should be acknowledged to be about pragmaticism.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
what magicians want more than, and that's the difference between magic and religion, really. They want to celebrate the mysteries through a tradition of repetition, enacting a magical process that theologically is called sort of anamnesis. You could call it a magical process. I definitely think the epiclesis, the transformation of the bread and the blood in the mass, is a magical action. In fact, the word is epiclesis for when the spirit goes through the priest, who represents Christ through anamnesis, and transforms it into this spiritual substance that contains the essence of Christ, and then you consume it. Actually, Skinner doesn't go far enough in his analysis of the mass, probably because he's a classicist and not a theologian, which is the slight difference between our fields, right? Because academically we have very similar backgrounds. He could go further and say into his analysis of it as a magical act, because not only does the spirit transform through epiclesis, but then you consume it, and it has the magical effect of removing all venial sin. So when Christians consume the sacrifice, the host, the body and blood, or just the body is sufficient because it has blood in it, is the theory.
Right.
That's how they started saving money on wine for all their parishioners. That's exactly why that happened, but more or less.
Interesting.
That was the argument, because there was outcries in the Middle Ages when certain churches stopped offering wine along with the host. Of course there was, right? Because people wanted to drink the wine, but they wanted to keep the host in their mouth to take it home and powder it up for an ointment for their sick cat, or to put a string through it and wear it as a talisman on a necklace. This was beyond common practice. This was
Wow.
ubiquitous. Yeah. And
That's very interesting. Yeah.
so you consume the magical body of Christ, and it cleanses you of venial sin, not mortal sin. That's why it's very specifically magical. It's not some like religious panacea, like God fixes all things. No, it's got a very specific limit to its power.
Interesting.
It cleanses you of venial sin. You can't take it if you are beset by mortal sin. It doesn't work. It's actually a sin to take it while beset by mortal sin. Mortal sin must be confessed to the priest, and that's why you do confession before mass. It seems extremely magical by any definition.
Sure. Yeah, very interesting.
It's just not called that. Magic's evil in that theology.
Right.
Going back to the classic origin of Magia, of the Persian Magi, being called magic because that's what you called other people's religion, to discredit it.
Sure. Yeah, very interesting. I think that we're in a special time, though. We have these scholars and these, I guess you would just say scholars and researchers. And at the same time, we have these practitioners. Sometimes they're both scholars and historians and practitioners, or you just have a lot of scholars coming in with the practitioners, synergistically working together. So I think we're in a unique time, right? Would you agree? So you have a lot of people putting out books, studying, doing a lot of research, working with practitioners or practicing themselves. I think this is a very unique time that, there's a lot of there's a lot of benefit to be made for each person or each practitioner, each historian. So for example, you have like Justin Sledge. I love his channel, Esoteric, where it's like I've actually chatted with him on one of his live streams. He doesn't do any. He majored in esotericism with a focus on John Dee and the Enochian magic. And
I'm actually just like a third of the way through his master's right now, because he's the only other person in esotericism that I've seen who focused on semiotics, and that's what I focused on. So Ferdinand de Saussure and Charles Sanders Peirce were like my course study leading up through the postmodernness, like Roland Barthes and his approach to anthropology and mythology. Again, this is also coming out of Claude Lévi-Strauss, and then up to Umberto Eco, who really synthesized semiotic approaches. And then my favorites, which are Robert Corrington, Kevin Hart, and these are Robert Corrington specific reframes metaphysics in a semiological naturalist approach, which is really his work's really amazing. His new book, I think, is his new book, his last book, is called Deep Pantheism. Very interesting. But I would say they should start with his book Ecstatic Naturalism. But if you aren't somewhat versed in philosophy, it could be tricky.
Yeah, very interesting though. So, but I mean, as you mentioned, Sledge, he's putting a lot of information out there, a lot of history, research, things along those lines. But he doesn't actually practice himself. He even mentions he's never tried Enochian magic. He's never tried.
He went to Amsterdam with a friend of mine. He was in the same class as a friend of mine when he did his Amsterdam degree. So yeah.
Very interesting.
Along with a few other guys, we all. Anyway, he's a D&D guy. He's a cool
Dungeons
dude.
and Dragons, right? Yeah, there you go.
Most so like from my first association for the study of esotericism in East Lansing, 2004. When I hooked up with that whole crowd academically, it was during my second master's year, and they are not practitioners. Like you can't talk about it. Like you couldn't talk about it back then. Like you did not say that. Like you would be mocked very readily. If people knew that you were a practitioner, and if it hadn't been for the National Post of Canada, the National Post newspaper, outing me in a 11, they talked about me for 11 paragraphs in this national cover story on the Waldorf school system, and they just trashed, like it was a
hit piece,
a libelous attack. Hack such a job if ever I saw one, and it had fully discredited me before I even arrived at the conference. The organizers and everyone knew about it, and that was when I found out that even though I got accepted by Nicholas Goodrick Clark in his doctoral program and did that, there was likely no chance that I would ever get published in the academic field because of that hit piece. And that was done to me when I was 21, that National Post. And that woman now is like the head of a huge corporation, man. These journalists, man, that's why I tell people I was canceled before cancel culture. Like took a top student from a excellent school, breaking academic records, and just destroyed his life academically before it could even start, and through lies. So crazy. That's a story. I haven't ever talked about that. Carol Millstone, she can go fuck herself.
It seems like the safe way is to go all theory and history, but not an actual. I don't do this. I study the history of it. That's the safe route,
Imagine if your job was just to run around publishing lies about people to destroy their lives.
Well, yeah. That's a big thing in the West. It seems these days. It seems like it's sort of a sport. Like, what's the next thing to hunt down? And I want to cancel him. It's sort of it looks like a sport, literally. Let's hunt down the next thing to cancel and all celebrate it, and then find the next guy to hunt down. I don't know. It's very odd. I don't know. I don't even know what to think of it. Really.
Toxic tribalism.
Yeah. Tribalism is a good way to describe it. Or I don't know. I think that people are so comfortable that I don't know. It's like vicarious joy out of making other people suffer or taking them down. Sort of this. Tribalism is probably the best way to describe it, I would say. Really. Yeah. But yeah. All right. Well, I'm getting kind of sleepy.
If you focus on the fun things in your life and the magical things you can do, I think that's the best way out of that stuff. Honestly,
good point. I mean,
create your own reality.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I'm enjoying my life. I meet people I like to meet. I have a good life. I do my own practice. I do my own readings, studies. I travel the world. I'm never thinking about how can I fuck that guy over? What did he say wrong 20 years ago? That's literally the last thing on my mind is thinking about what did somebody else do 10 years ago that I might fuck him over for bringing up. Like, that's literally the last thing. When you're living an abundant life in happiness, in bliss, following your true will, whatever you want to call it, right? You're doing what you love. You're living your life. You're happy. You're not. By default, you're not going to be looking to crucify the next guy, like Jesus said, right? Like, why look for fault in another person when you have a log in your own eye, right? It's sort of, that's probably the last thing that's on your mind, right? Whereas
Yeah.
I think on a soul, maybe in the West, I'm in the East right now, I'm in Korea, totally different continent. But in the West, it seems like that's sort of the group mentality is sort of this blame the other person. What's wrong with everyone else rather than what's wrong with me? How do I improve my life? How do I make my life an epic life? My interest is more, I want to live an epic life. I want to do Enochian magic. I want to travel the world. I want to learn languages. I want to make it epic. I'm not thinking about how do I fuck the next guy over or what's wrong with him.
No,
That's not even in
no.
my mindset, really.
It's,
You know,
if you're
yeah.
yeah, no, just like, you know, there's not enough time in the day for that. We got songs to write, music to play,
Music
books
to
to read,
write,
spells
music
to
to
cast.
play. Yeah, there's too much to do that it's not about blaming someone else. It's more about what can I do in my life? How can I bring good energy to myself and to those around me? It's not about
Amen.
crucifying other people or blaming or, you know, complaining or anything along those lines. How can I improve myself and thus bring good energy to those around me, right?
Yeah.
Bring yourself up and in turn bring others up, not what's wrong with everyone else and let's complain and talk about it for 100 hours, right? Like that's sort of that's a very low energy, low vibrational paradigm versus the high vibrational paradigm. Improve yourself, bring others up, right? Create, manifest in the world. It's the total opposite. It's not destroy and bring others down and complain, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's a big difference I noticed between, you know, I mean, maybe I don't live in America or Canada or anything like that. I don't really know what's actually going on there. It's just what I see on the internet. It's kind of how I perceive it. Like everyone's in this very low level,
Yeah,
low
you're sitting
vibrational
pretty in
paradigm.
Korea.
Yeah, it's totally different. Here, people don't care. It's like, yeah, live your own life. I don't care. Do your thing. Whereas when I look on like Twitter or American social media or the news, it's the opposite. It's like, what's wrong with him? What did he say 30 years ago that would be wrong? Right?
Yeah.
It's the opposite of South Korea, literally, right? You know. So I don't really know what's going on there. I'm not really the person to talk about that, but I think ultimately realizing your life's in your own hands. You got to figure shit out. Figure shit out for yourself. Make yourself a good life. Bring other people up. It's not about you know, blaming other people. Sort of have a little bit of accountability and do your own thing. Figure out what works for you. You know,
Yeah, well,
that's my take on it.
the real horrors of the future might not come in our lifetime if we're lucky. And
Sure.
so really it falls upon us to just try and treat each other in ways, educate each other in ways that there's hope in the future generations, right? That we leave behind
Right.
a legacy, not for our own edification, but
Mhm.
for global education. You know, let's try and let our lives be lessons to those who may come
Sure,
after.
sure, sure. I
Yeah.
think one thing that the West could probably take from the East, so here it's a group culture. It's that everyone is the same. We're all part of this group. They see everyone as one. We're all part of this country. We're all part of this ecosystem. It's not red versus blue or the gays versus the, you know what I mean? It's not like that sort of this versus that. It's we need to learn how to all live
BTS
together.
versus Zeppelin.
Yeah, yeah, right. But I think that, you know, if anything can be taken away, it's sort of seeing everybody, we're all reflections of each other. We're all part of the same, we're all living in the same country or the same city. We're
Yeah.
all reflections, we're all one vibration living off each other. It's not about cutting each other down, but how can we all live together? How can we all bring each other up? How can we all, you know, mutually cooperate with each other, and you know, not from a place of ignorance, but rather from a place of mutual understanding. I think that's a very important, you know, distinction to draw, rather than how can I cut him down, how can I complain about what he did, you know. So I mean, I
Yeah.
hope the magical path or whatever you study brings you to a place of seeing each other as companions on this path, or fellow, what do you want to say, fellow spirits in the world, rather than people to shit
Yeah.
on or complain on all day, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
right.
where initiation can be useful. You know, if I was stuck in a rut, and initiations always helped.
Sure.
It helped when I was 7 at my first initiation, and then 10, and then, like, you know, 13, 15. And I've been going through initiations my whole life, and it helps me change and grows in ways that benefit me, that
Yeah.
serve me, rather than, yeah, I mean, we can change for the better. And
Yeah.
and it can be a fun process if you're doing it magically.
Right. Comes down to
So,
Bill Hicks, right? Like he said, you can view the world through love and union, we're all one consciousness, or you can view the world through hate and fear. We're all separate. We're all enemies, right? It's kind of a choice, right? It's how you view things, how you act, how you choose to live in the moment. I think.
to quote, yeah, my theological mentor, Dr. Sally McFaig, would always quote Eric Heller: "Be careful how you interpret the world. It is really like that."
Really is, right? Really is.
Yeah. So I have an article on a new study on self-initiation coming out in Studio Magica, a new magical journal that like Stephen Skinner and a bunch of others, Chris Bennett, all committed to write articles for. And that's yeah, I think our deadline, our writer's deadline for that is next month. So
Sweet.
That'll be out very soon, and I've almost finished my piece on that. And it's prefacing a book I'll have for the fall or early next year that looks at some very new, exciting stuff that I really haven't whispered about at all because it's a surprise.
It's a surprise. Nice. All right. Well, is there anything? I'm getting kind of sleepy on this end, but
Yeah.
anything you want to plug? Anything you want to mention?
Go check out my podcast at hermeticpodcast.com or magicwithoutfears.com. It's on Spotify, everywhere, like all the podcast platforms. YouTube's not a great place to listen to it. iTunes is okay, but it deletes like 20% of the episodes because we're pretty rambunctious, I guess, or they're just flaky, who knows. And hermeticmysteryschool.com for the free Cyber Guild for a free monthly class. And if you dig what we do, you can check out the weekly classes for $50 a month. And
a lot of value there. I'm in your Cyber Guild. I can mention there's a lot of value, a lot of cool stuff, a lot of GD stuff, a lot of experimental, things you have going on. So it's a little bit of mix of the traditional Golden Dawn, but also not only the traditional Golden Dawn, which you might want to get into, but also a lot of experimental, working with the Heptarchia,
cover a lot of stuff,
with other stuff. So you get a mix of both. You get a good mix.
Yeah,
of both,
like next month we're studying more Tatwas, more Enochian, and we've got some fairy evocations on the books, and also Kabbalah lessons, and just I teach in a very holistic way based on practices and techniques, and supplement it with large amounts of theory, but only as appropriate to really facilitate increased operative workings. And most people everyone involved is either in a group or on a self-initiatory path. It doesn't really matter, and everyone's super cool and chill, so it's fun. We have a good time. And
perfect.
Thanks for having me back, brother.
Very good. I think you're my second returning guest. I've only had you and Cliff on for 2 different episodes, so that's good. And
that's how I first heard about you.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do it again soon too, for sure.
Shalom.
Okay, all right.